I still remember the sound of the coffee maker humming in our kitchen that Tuesday morning. It was 7:12 a.m. The sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor, and our golden retriever, Charlie, lay peacefully by the back door, unaware that my entire life was about to collapse. "Evelyn," Daniel said quietly. There was something different about his voice. Not angry, not nervous, just empty. I looked up from packing my lunch for work. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, folded his hands together, and said the 7 words that would destroy 15 years of marriage. "I don't love you anymore. I want a divorce." For a moment I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain refused to believe what I'd just heard. "What?" "I've been unhappy for a long time." I stared at him. Yesterday we'd watched a movie together. Last weekend we'd visited his parents. 3 weeks earlier we'd celebrated our 15th anniversary. Nothing had prepared me for this. "Is there someone else?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence told me everything. My name is Evelyn Carter. I was 42 years old, a high school English teacher in Columbus, Ohio. I believed in loyalty, in marriage, in growing old with one person. Daniel believed in something else. Someone else. I found out who she was later that afternoon. Not from Daniel. From Instagram. A smiling picture. Daniel. His arm wrapped around my best friend, Melissa. The woman I'd known since college. The woman who had stood beside me as my maid of honor. The woman who used to call me her sister. The caption read, "Sometimes life surprises you with the love you were always meant to find." It had been posted only 20 minutes earlier. Thousands of tiny pieces shattered inside me. Melissa had eaten dinner at my house every Thanksgiving. She knew my favorite flowers. She knew every insecurity I'd ever confessed. She had hugged me after my mother's funeral. And all that time, she had been stealing my husband. When Daniel came home that evening, I was sitting in the dark living room. I held my phone in my shaking hand. "I know." He closed his eyes. "Evelyn." "How long?" "Months? 1 year? 2?" His answer made me physically sick. "Almost 3 years." 3 years. 3 birthdays. 3 anniversaries. 3 Christmas mornings. Every smile. Every kiss. Every "I love you." A lie. Did everyone know? My parents figured it out. My brother? Yes. Our friends? He remained silent. I laughed through tears. "So I'm the last person in my own life to know." "I'm sorry." "No." I stood. "You're sorry you got caught." The divorce happened faster than I expected. Daniel had already hired a lawyer, already prepared paperwork, already rented an apartment, already planned a future with Melissa. He hadn't decided to leave. He had planned an escape. There is a difference. The hardest part wasn't losing my husband. It was losing my identity. For 15 years, I had been someone's wife. Now I was just alone. Our house echoed with silence. Charlie's confused eyes searched every room for Daniel. Sometimes he waited by the front window until midnight. Dogs don't understand betrayal. They only understand absence. The weeks that followed became a blur. I stopped cooking, stopped answering texts, stopped looking in mirrors. One evening, my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, knocked on my door carrying a homemade lasagna. "You haven't opened your curtains in 5 days," she said gently. I burst into tears before she even stepped inside. She hugged me without asking questions. Sometimes kindness from strangers hurts the most because it reminds you what genuine love feels like. School became my escape. Teenagers didn't know my marriage had exploded. To them, I was simply Mrs. Carter, the teacher who loved books, the woman who believed every story deserved a hopeful ending. One afternoon, a quiet student named Lily stayed after class. "Mrs. Carter?" "Yes?" "You always tell us that people show us who they are." "I do. My mom says that's true too." She hesitated. "I think you need to remember your own advice." I looked at her. Children notice more than adults think. That night, I removed every photograph of Daniel from the walls. Not because I hated him, because I refused to let my future be decorated by someone who had chosen to betray me. I packed the pictures into a cardboard box. At the very bottom, I found an old handwritten note. It was from Daniel. "No matter what happens, I'll always choose you." I stared at it for a long time. Then I smiled sadly. People don't always break promises in one moment. Sometimes they break them slowly. One lie at a time. Across town, Daniel and Melissa posted another smiling picture online. Hundreds of comments congratulated them. They looked happy. They looked perfect. They looked like the winners. What they didn't know was that life has a strange way of balancing every account. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive immediately. Sometimes it waits, quietly, patiently, until the people who cause the deepest pain find themselves standing where their victim once stood. 3 years from now, someone would knock on my front door. When I opened it, the last 2 people I ever expected to see would be standing there, broken, desperate, begging for the help they never thought they'd need. The first morning after the divorce was finalized, Evelyn woke up before sunrise. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. Then she reached across the bed. Cold sheets. Empty space. Reality settled in all over again. She sat up, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and stared out the bedroom window. The maple tree Daniel had planted during their second year of marriage swayed gently in the autumn breeze. Today, she whispered to herself, I survive. Not thrive, not smile. Just survive. That was enough. The next few months became a routine of quiet endurance. She taught English during the day, graded essays at night, and tried to ignore the constant reminders of the life she'd lost. At the grocery store, she automatically reached for Daniel's favorite cereal before catching herself. At restaurants, she still asked for a table for 2. On Sundays, she instinctively brewed 2 cups of coffee. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was thousands of tiny moments where she had to relearn her own life. One Friday afternoon, the school principal, Mrs. Reynolds, called Evelyn into her office. I've been watching your classes, she said with a warm smile. You've handled everything with incredible grace. Evelyn shrugged. I'm just doing my job. No, Mrs. Reynolds replied. You're changing lives. She slid a folder across the desk. We'd like you to lead our new creative writing program. Evelyn blinked. Me? You inspire students. They trust you. For the first time in months, someone wasn't looking at her with pity. They saw potential. She accepted immediately. The writing club quickly became her favorite part of the week. Students shared stories about fear, hope, family, and dreams. One evening, after everyone had left, a shy sophomore named Ethan handed her a notebook. I almost dropped out last year, he admitted. But your class made me believe my story mattered. Inside the notebook was a dedication. To Mrs. Carter, the teacher who reminded me that broken chapters don't mean the story is over. Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes. Maybe she wasn't as broken as she thought. Meanwhile, Daniel and Melissa filled social media with pictures from expensive vacations, beach sunsets, luxury restaurants, weekend getaways. Friends commented, couple goals. You two were meant for each other. So happy you finally found true love. Evelyn muted every account. She refused to let curated photos become the measure of her own happiness. Instead, she focused on herself. She joined a local gym, started taking morning walks with Charlie, cooked healthy meals, read novels she'd been putting off for years. She even signed up for a public speaking workshop, something she'd always been too nervous to try. Every small victory rebuilt a piece of her confidence. Then came an unexpected opportunity. One of her students secretly submitted her classroom, writing lessons to a national education magazine. A month later, the editor called, We'd love for you to write a monthly column. Evelyn laughed. There must be some mistake. There isn't. We believe teachers across America could learn from your approach. Her first article was published under the title, Every Student Has a Story Worth Hearing. It quickly became one of the magazine's most read articles. Soon she was invited to speak at education conferences across the country. For the first time in years, people knew Evelyn Carter, not as someone's wife, but for her own voice. One evening after a conference in Chicago, another speaker approached her. I'm Michael Lawson. He extended his hand. I've been following your work. Michael was the founder of a nonprofit that provided creative writing programs to underserved schools. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't trying to impress her. He simply listened whenever she spoke. It had been a long time since someone listened. Over dinner with a group of educators, Michael asked, "So, what made you start writing?" Evelyn smiled. "I had my heart broken." He nodded thoughtfully. The best writers usually do. There was no awkward silence, no uncomfortable sympathy, just understanding. For the first time since her divorce, conversation felt effortless. Back in Columbus, life continued improving. Her writing column grew. Schools invited her to give keynote speeches. Parents thanked her for encouraging their children. She opened a savings account labeled New Beginnings. Every speaking fee went into it. Within 18 months, she'd saved enough to renovate her home completely. Fresh paint, new furniture, a beautiful home office. She transformed every room that still carried memories of Daniel. This house no longer belonged to the woman he'd abandoned. It belonged to the woman she was becoming. Across town, Daniel's life wasn't as perfect as Instagram suggested. Melissa loved expensive vacations, luxury handbags, designer clothes. Their credit card debt quietly climbed month after month. Daniel worked longer hours trying to keep up. Arguments became frequent. Small disagreements turned into shouting matches. One night, Melissa slammed a bedroom door so hard a picture frame crashed to the floor. Daniel stared at the broken glass. For reasons he couldn't explain, he suddenly remembered Evelyn. She had never raised her voice, never demanded expensive gifts, never embarrassed him in public. For the first time, regret whispered into his mind. But he pushed it away. He'd made his choice. Hadn't he? 3 years after the divorce, Evelyn stood in front of hundreds of teachers at a national education conference. When she finished speaking, the audience rose in a standing ovation. As applause echoed through the ballroom, she realized something remarkable. The woman who once believed her life had ended, had just begun. She smiled, not because the pain was gone, but because it no longer controlled her. What she didn't know was that only a few miles away, Daniel's carefully built world was beginning to collapse. Within weeks, everything he had chosen over her would be slipping through his fingers. And sooner than anyone expected, there would be a knock at Evelyn's front door. 3 years earlier, Evelyn had stood in the middle of her empty living room, wondering if she'd ever feel whole again. Now she stood on a stage in Seattle, accepting the National Excellence in Education Award before an audience of nearly 1,000 teachers. As the applause filled the room, she remembered the woman who had cried herself to sleep after finding Daniel and Melissa's photo online. If she could speak to that version of herself now, she would say only one thing: keep going. One day this pain will become your strength. Back in Columbus, life had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Every morning began the same way. Charlie wagging his tail. Coffee brewing. Sunlight pouring through the kitchen windows. The silence that once felt unbearable had become comforting. She no longer feared being alone. She had learned the difference between loneliness and peace. Her writing career continued to grow. Publishers contacted her about turning her articles into a book. At first, she laughed. "I'm just a teacher." The editor smiled. "Exactly. America needs teachers like you." After months of work, her first book was released, Finding Your Voice After the Storm. It wasn't about divorce. It was about resilience. Within weeks, it became a bestseller in the education category. Letters poured in from readers across the country. One read, "Your words gave me the courage to leave an abusive relationship. Thank you for reminding me that starting over isn't failure." Evelyn cried as she folded the letter and placed it in a small, wooden box she kept on her desk. Whenever self-doubt returned, she reread those letters. They reminded her that even painful experiences could become a source of hope for someone else. Michael Lawson remained a steady presence in her life. Unlike Daniel, he never tried to solve her problems. He simply showed up. When she had a book signing, he was there. When Charlie needed surgery, he drove her to the veterinary clinic. When she doubted herself before giving a keynote speech, he handed her a cup of coffee and said, "They invited you because you're already enough. No grand speeches, no empty promises, just quiet consistency." One Saturday afternoon, Michael invited her to help renovate a community library. Children laughed as they painted colorful murals. Parents organized books onto new shelves. Watching everyone work together, Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Later, while cleaning paint from his hands, Michael looked at her. "You smile differently now." She laughed. "What does that mean?" "The first time I met you, your smile looked like something you practiced." "And now?" "Now it looks real." She looked away, embarrassed. Maybe he was right. Meanwhile, Daniel's life was unraveling. The company where he had worked for 14 years announced major layoffs. His department was eliminated. At 45, he suddenly found himself unemployed. Melissa wasn't sympathetic. "What are we supposed to do now?" "I'm looking for work." "Looking isn't paying the bills." The arguments became louder, crueler. One evening, she threw a stack of unpaid credit card bills onto the kitchen table. "This is your fault." Daniel stared silently at the growing pile of debt. For the first time, he admitted something to himself. The excitement he'd mistaken for love had faded long ago. All that remained was resentment. Then came another blow. Melissa's small online fashion business failed after a supplier went bankrupt. Their savings disappeared trying to keep it alive. They sold jewelry, then Daniel's motorcycle, then Melissa's designer handbags. Still, it wasn't enough. The luxury apartment they'd once proudly shown on social media became impossible to afford. Within months, they moved into a small rental house on the edge of town. No more vacations. No more expensive dinners. No more smiling Instagram photos. The posts quietly stopped. One rainy afternoon, Daniel stopped at a bookstore while waiting for a job interview. Near the entrance stood a large display. His heart nearly stopped. There, stacked in neat rows, was Evelyn's book. Above it hung a banner. "Meet best-selling author Evelyn Carter. Book signing this Saturday." Daniel picked up a copy. He turned it over. There she was, confident, smiling, radiating the happiness he'd once believed she'd never find without him. He opened to the dedication page. To anyone who has ever been told they weren't enough. "You always were." His hands trembled. He bought the book. That night, while Melissa watched television upstairs, Daniel read until 2 a.m. Every chapter reminded him of the woman he'd taken for granted. Not once did Evelyn mention him by name. Not once did she seek revenge. Instead, she wrote about forgiveness, growth, and refusing to let betrayal define a life. Closing the book, Daniel whispered into the empty room, "I was the one who wasn't enough." A few weeks later, Evelyn hosted another community writing workshop. After everyone left, Michael walked beside her to the parking lot. "I've been meaning to ask you something." She smiled. "That sounds serious." "It is." He took a deep breath. "I know you've been hurt before." She nodded. "I also know you're stronger than anyone I've ever met." He reached into his coat pocket, not for a ring, but for 2 tickets. A week in Maine, just the 2 of us. No speeches, no conferences, no work. She laughed. "That's your big question?" "My real question is, would you like to see where this relationship could go?" Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Years ago, fear would have answered. Now hope did. "I'd like that." He smiled, relief washing over his face. That evening, as Evelyn returned home, Charlie barked excitedly from the front window. She scratched behind his ears and looked around the house. She'd rebuilt piece by piece. Every wall, every room, every memory. None of it had come easily. But it was hers. Completely hers. She had stopped waiting for an apology that might never come. She had built a life so full that revenge no longer mattered. What she didn't know was that fate wasn't finished. Across town, Daniel had just received a phone call that would change everything. Within days, he and Melissa would lose the last thing keeping their lives together. And with nowhere else to turn, they would remember the woman they had betrayed. The phone rang at 8:17 on a Tuesday morning. Daniel glanced at the screen. It was the bank. He answered with a knot already forming in his stomach. "Mr. Carter," the representative said, "we've been trying to reach you regarding your mortgage payments." Daniel closed his eyes. "I know. I'm afraid your account is now seriously overdue. If payment isn't received soon, foreclosure proceedings will begin." The call lasted less than 5 minutes. But when it ended, Daniel sat in complete silence. He had spent 3 years chasing a life that looked perfect from the outside. Now it was collapsing faster than he could stop it. Melissa wasn't interested in comforting him. She walked into the kitchen, saw his expression, and sighed. "Let me guess. The bank." She folded her arms. "So what now?" "I don't know. You always say that." "I'm trying." "No," she snapped. "You're failing." Daniel looked at the woman he had once believed was his soulmate. The warmth that had drawn him to her was gone. Every conversation had become an argument. Every day felt heavier than the one before. That evening, Melissa packed a suitcase. Daniel stared at her. "What are you doing?" "I can't live like this anymore." "So you're leaving?" She zipped the suitcase without looking at him. "I didn't sign up for this." Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "Funny." "What?" "Those are almost the exact words I used when I left Evelyn." Melissa froze for a moment. Then she looked away. Neither of them spoke. Deep down, they both knew the truth. A relationship built on betrayal had never been built on trust. Within a week, Melissa moved into her sister's apartment. Daniel was alone. The silence in the small rental house felt unbearable. He opened old photo albums, searching for something he couldn't quite name. There were pictures of family barbecues, Christmas mornings, camping trips, Evelyn laughing with flour on her face after baking cookies. He realized something painful. Those weren't just photographs. They were memories of a life he had thrown away. Meanwhile, Evelyn's life continued moving forward. Her publisher called with exciting news. "Your book has been selected for a national reading campaign." She smiled. "Seriously? And we'd like to discuss a second book." A second book. Years ago, she had believed her future ended with her marriage. Now opportunities seemed to arrive every month. That evening, she celebrated with Michael at their favorite little Italian restaurant. As they walked back to the car, Michael stopped beneath a streetlight. "I've been thinking." "That usually means something important," Evelyn teased. He smiled. "I love the life we're building." She looked into his eyes. "So do I." There were no dramatic declarations. No promises that sounded too good to be true. Just two people choosing each other every day. A month later, Michael invited Evelyn to visit a lakeside cabin owned by his parents. The weekend was peaceful. They hiked, cooked together, watched the sunset from the porch. On the final evening, Michael reached into his jacket pocket. This time, it wasn't tickets. It was a small velvet box. "Evelyn Carter." She covered her mouth. "You've taught me that strength isn't about never falling." He opened the box. "It's about choosing to stand back up." Inside was a simple diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes. Not tears of sadness. Tears of gratitude. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the future. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Charlie barked excitedly as if he somehow understood. Both of them laughed. News of the engagement spread quickly. Friends celebrated. Former students sent congratulations. Her publisher posted the announcement online. Thousands of people wished the couple happiness. One of those people accidentally shared the post. Daniel saw it. His hands began to shake. He stared at the photograph. Evelyn looked happier than he had ever seen her. Not because she had found another man. Because she had found herself. He realized something that hit him harder than losing his job. She no longer needed him. And she never would again. Weeks later, Daniel finally found temporary work unloading delivery trucks. The pay barely covered groceries. One rainy evening, after finishing a long shift, he drove past the neighborhood where he and Evelyn had once lived. Without thinking, he slowed the car. Her house looked different. Fresh paint. Beautiful landscaping. Flowers lined the front walkway. Lights glowed warmly through the windows. Laughter drifted outside. He saw Evelyn through the dining room window. She was setting the table. Michael was helping her carry dishes from the kitchen. They smiled at each other. It wasn't the loud excitement Daniel once shared with Melissa. It was something quieter. Something stronger. Peace. Daniel drove away before they could see him. For the first time in his life, he cried. Not because he wanted Evelyn back. Because he finally understood what he had destroyed. 3 days later, another disaster struck. The delivery company announced it was closing its regional warehouse. Daniel lost his job again. He checked his bank account. Less than $300 remained. His phone buzzed. A message from Melissa. "My landlord is evicting me. I don't know what to do." He stared at the screen. The woman he had left everything for was now just as desperate as he was. Life had come full circle. That same evening, Evelyn and Michael sat on the back porch, talking about wedding plans. The air was cool. Fireflies danced across the yard. Michael squeezed her hand. "Do you ever think about your old life?" She was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes." "Do you miss it?" She smiled gently. "I miss who I thought people were." Then she looked at him. "But I don't miss the people who proved me wrong." Michael nodded. He understood. Across town, Daniel sat alone in the darkness. He looked at an old address written in a notebook. Evelyn's house. He hadn't been there in 3 years. He stared at it for a long time. Finally, he whispered to himself, "I don't have anyone else." The decision he made that night would change all of their lives. The next morning, Daniel picked up Melissa. Together, they drove toward the one house they never imagined they would visit again. Saturday morning arrived with clear blue skies. Evelyn stood in her kitchen humming softly as she mixed pancake batter. Michael poured coffee while Charlie waited patiently, hoping for a piece of bacon. The house felt warm, comfortable, safe. It was the kind of peace Evelyn once believed she'd never experience again. The doorbell rang. She glanced at the clock. "That must be my sister," she said. Drying her hands on a towel, she walked to the front door with a smile. The smile disappeared the moment she opened it. Standing on the porch were 2 people she hadn't seen in 3 years. Daniel, Melissa. Neither looked anything like the confident couple from the photos that had once shattered her heart. Daniel's suit had been replaced by faded jeans and a worn jacket. Melissa's face looked exhausted. The confidence in her eyes had been replaced by fear. For several seconds, no one spoke. Finally, Daniel whispered, "Hi, Evelyn." She kept one hand on the doorknob. "What are you doing here?" Daniel swallowed. "We need your help." Those 4 words echoed through her mind. 3 years earlier, she had begged him to explain why he was leaving. Now he was the one asking. Life had a strange sense of timing. Michael stepped into the hallway behind her. "Everything okay?" Evelyn nodded gently. "I'll handle this." Michael didn't ask questions. He simply placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder before returning to the kitchen. That small gesture reminded Evelyn how different healthy love felt. There was trust, not control. Support, not suspicion. Daniel looked at the floor. "I lost my job." Evelyn remained silent. Melissa spoke next. "We've both lost everything." "I see. The bank took the house. Our savings are gone. We've been staying in cheap motels." Daniel finally looked up. "I know I don't deserve your kindness." "No," Evelyn answered calmly. "You don't." The words weren't cruel. They were simply true. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "I know you hate me." Evelyn shook her head. "I don't." Melissa looked surprised. "Hate is heavy." Evelyn folded her arms. "I stopped carrying it a long time ago." For the first time since arriving, Melissa began to cry openly. Not because Evelyn had yelled, because she hadn't. Daniel took a deep breath. "I've replayed that day 1,000 times. I know saying I'm sorry can't fix what I did." "It can't." "I know. I destroyed our marriage." "Yes, I destroyed your trust." "Yes, I thought I was chasing happiness." He looked toward the ground again. "I was chasing excitement." Evelyn listened quietly. Years ago, she had imagined this moment. Back then, she dreamed of making him suffer. Now, she felt something unexpected. "Pity. I've read your book," Daniel admitted. "It made me realize who I was." Evelyn didn't smile. "I'm glad it helped." "You wrote about forgiveness." "I did." "So, can you forgive me?" She looked directly into his eyes. "I forgave you a long time ago." Hope flickered across his face. Then she continued, "Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences." His shoulders dropped. "I know." "No, Danielle." She spoke gently, I don't think you do. She stepped onto the porch and quietly closed the front door behind her. I spent months believing I wasn't enough. I questioned everything about myself. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I blamed myself for choices you made. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Evelyn continued. While I was learning how to survive, you were posting vacation photos with my best friend. Neither Daniel nor Melissa could respond. There were nights I cried until sunrise. There were mornings I barely made it to work. You don't get those years back. Daniel nodded slowly. I know. No. She shook her head. You can understand it, but you'll never truly know it. Silence settled over the porch. Birds chirped in the nearby trees. Children laughed somewhere down the street. Life continued, just as it always had. Finally, Melissa spoke. I betrayed the only real friend I ever had. I told myself we were in love. But real love doesn't begin by destroying someone else's life. She wiped away tears. I've regretted it every day. Evelyn believed her. Not because the pain was gone. Because regret has a look that cannot be faked. Daniel reached into his pocket and handed Evelyn an envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. A list. Every dollar Evelyn had lost during the divorce. Every unpaid promise. Every financial sacrifice she'd made. At the bottom, Daniel had written, I'll spend the rest of my life repaying what I can. Not because it will fix anything, but because it's the right thing to do. Evelyn folded the paper. You don't owe me money. I owe you everything. No. She handed the paper back. What you owe me can't be measured in dollars. Michael quietly opened the front door. Coffee's getting cold, he said with a gentle smile. He looked at Daniel and Melissa. Would either of you like a cup? Daniel stared at him in surprise. You'd invite us inside? Michael answered simply. Kindness says more about us than it does about the people receiving it. Evelyn smiled. That was exactly why she loved him. The four of them sat around the dining table. 3 years earlier, Evelyn couldn't have imagined such a moment. No shouting. No revenge. Just honesty. Daniel looked around the house. You've made this place beautiful. Evelyn smiled softly. I rebuilt it. Then she added, just like I rebuilt myself. Daniel nodded. I can see that. As they finished their coffee, Evelyn walked to a small bookshelf and removed a copy of her book. She signed the inside cover, then handed it to Melissa. Melissa looked confused. For me? Evelyn nodded. Start with chapter 7. Why? Because it's about forgiving yourself after making terrible mistakes. Melissa began crying again. This time there were no words. When Daniel and Melissa stood to leave, Daniel paused at the front door. I don't expect another chance. You won't get one, Evelyn replied gently. I know. But thank you for letting us leave with a little dignity. Evelyn opened the door. I hope you both build honest lives. Daniel nodded. So do I. They walked slowly toward their old car. Neither looked back. Evelyn closed the door. She leaned against it for a moment. Not because she was overwhelmed, because she realized something profound. The chapter she thought needed revenge had actually needed peace. As she turned around, Michael held out his hand. Ready to finish breakfast? She smiled. More than ever. After Daniel and Melissa left, the house was quiet. Michael placed the coffee mugs in the sink, but didn't say anything. He knew Evelyn well enough to understand that some moments needed silence more than advice. She stood by the living room window, watching Daniel's old sedan disappear around the corner. 3 years ago, seeing him drive away had shattered her heart. Today, it felt like watching the last shadow of her past finally disappear. Are you okay? Michael asked softly. Evelyn smiled. I thought I'd feel angry. And? I don't. What do you feel? She thought for a moment. Free. Michael wrapped an arm around her shoulders. That's a good place to be. It took me a long time to get here. But you got here. She rested her head against him. Yes, she whispered. I did. Across town, Daniel drove in silence. Melissa stared out the passenger window. Neither of them spoke for nearly 20 minutes. Finally, Melissa broke the silence. She could have humiliated us. Daniel nodded. She had every reason to. But she didn't. He gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. That's who Evelyn always was. A tear rolled down Melissa's cheek. And we treated that kindness like weakness. They parked outside the small motel where they had been staying. The manager was waiting at the office door. "I'm sorry," he said. "I need payment by tomorrow morning." Daniel lowered his eyes. "I understand." That night, they counted every dollar they had left. It wasn't enough. For the first time in years, they accepted a truth they had been avoiding. No one was coming to rescue them. They would have to rebuild from the ground up. Just as Evelyn once had. The next morning, Daniel walked into a local construction company. "I'll take any job." The manager looked over his resume. "You've never worked construction." "I'll learn." "It's hard work." "I know." The manager studied his face for a moment. "You start Monday." Daniel smiled for the first time in weeks. "Thank you." Melissa found work at a neighborhood bakery. The pay was modest. The hours started before sunrise. On her first day, she spent 6 hours washing trays, sweeping floors and serving customers. Her feet ached. Her back hurt. Yet something unexpected happened. She felt honest. For years, she had chased appearances. Now, she simply wanted to earn her paycheck with dignity. Meanwhile, Evelyn's second book was nearing completion. This one wasn't about teaching. It was about resilience. Its title was The Life You Build After Goodbye. During an interview, the host asked, "What's the biggest lesson you've learned?" Evelyn smiled thoughtfully. That closure doesn't come from hearing someone apologize. It comes from becoming someone their betrayal can no longer define. The clip spread across social media. Millions of people watched it. Thousands shared their own stories of heartbreak and healing. Without ever mentioning Daniel, Evelyn had become a voice for people learning to start over. A month later, Michael and Evelyn visited the community library where they had first grown close. Children were filling the room with laughter as they worked on short stories. One little girl tugged on Evelyn's sleeve. "Mrs. Carter?" "Yes." "My mom says you're famous." Evelyn laughed. "I don't know about that." The little girl smiled. "I want to write books like you someday." Evelyn knelt beside her. "Then start today." The girl held up a notebook proudly. "I already did." Moments like that meant more to Evelyn than book sales or awards ever could. Winter arrived. Snow covered the streets of Columbus. One evening, Daniel was finishing his shift when he noticed an elderly coworker struggling to lift heavy equipment. Without hesitation, he stepped forward. "I've got it." The man smiled. "Thanks." Over the following weeks, Daniel became known as the employee who always stayed late to help others. Not because he wanted recognition, because he finally understood the value of character, his supervisor noticed. 3 months later, Daniel was promoted to crew leader. It wasn't a glamorous position, but it was earned. Honestly, Melissa also changed. She volunteered every Saturday at a local women's shelter. One afternoon, a young woman arrived after leaving a painful relationship. She sat alone, quietly crying. Melissa brought her a cup of tea. "I know it doesn't feel like it now," she said gently. "But one day you'll realize your story isn't over." As the words left her mouth, she realized she was repeating something Evelyn had once written. For the first time in years, Melissa felt she was putting something good back into the world. Spring brought another joyful milestone. Family and friends gathered beside a quiet lake for Evelyn and Michael's wedding. It wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. The ceremony was filled with laughter, heartfelt vows, and genuine happiness. As Evelyn walked down the aisle, she looked at the people who had stood by her during her darkest days. Mrs. Henderson smiled from the front row. Former students waved excitedly. Charlie wore a tiny blue bow tie and proudly carried the rings. Everyone laughed. When the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman in marriage?" Evelyn smiled and answered before anyone else could. "I give myself." The guests applauded. Michael grinned. "I wouldn't have it any other way." That evening, after the reception ended, Evelyn stood beneath the stars. Michael slipped his hand into hers. "Any regrets?" She looked up at the night sky. "Only one." "What is it?" "I wish I'd believed in myself sooner." He kissed her forehead. "You believe now." "Yes, and that's enough." Far away, in a small apartment across town, Daniel looked out his own window. He had just seen a photo online from Evelyn's wedding. He smiled sadly. Not with jealousy, but with gratitude. She had found the happiness he once promised, but failed to protect. And somehow, knowing she was truly happy helped him forgive himself just a little. Still, one final meeting remained, a meeting that neither of them expected, a meeting that would bring their story to its true ending. A year passed. For the first time in a long time, none of them were merely surviving. They were living, not the lives they had imagined years earlier, but honest lives. And sometimes that was better. Evelyn and Michael settled into married life with quiet happiness. There were no extravagant parties or endless social media posts. Their joy lived in simple moments. Sunday morning coffee on the porch, long walks with Charlie, reading side by side in the evenings. When Evelyn's second book became a national bestseller, Michael celebrated by cooking her favorite homemade lasagna. You know, she laughed, most people would buy champagne. He shrugged. I know what makes you smile. She realized that love wasn't measured by grand gestures. It was measured by attention. Daniel had now been working construction for over a year. His hands had grown rough. His back often ached. But every paycheck represented something he'd almost forgotten. Self-respect. One afternoon, his supervisor called him into the office. I've been watching you. Daniel immediately worried. Did I do something wrong? The supervisor smiled. You've done everything right. He slid a new contract across the desk. We're promoting you to site manager. Daniel stared at the paper. You trust me? I trust the man you've become. Daniel accepted the offer with tears in his eyes. Years earlier, he had chased success through shortcuts. Now success had found him through integrity. Melissa continued volunteering at the women's shelter. She had become one of its most dependable volunteers. One evening, the shelter director approached her. We're hiring a full-time outreach coordinator. Melissa looked surprised. You'd consider me? I already have. You know my past. The director smiled. Yes, but your past is why women trust you. For the first time in years. Melissa believed that even people who made terrible mistakes could still choose to do good. One crisp autumn afternoon, Evelyn received an invitation to speak at a charity fundraiser for education. She happily accepted. When she arrived at the hotel ballroom, she noticed a familiar face near the entrance. Daniel. He was wearing a simple navy suit. Nothing expensive. Nothing flashy. Just neat and professional. For a brief moment, they simply looked at one another. Then Daniel smiled politely. Congratulations on the new book. Thank you. I read it. She laughed softly. I had a feeling you might. It helped. I'm glad. There was no tension. Only two people acknowledging the distance they had both traveled. After the fundraiser ended, Daniel approached her once more. If you have a few minutes? Evelyn glanced toward Michael, who gave her an encouraging nod. I'll be right here, he said. She walked with Daniel to a quiet terrace overlooking the city lights. The air was cool. The silence felt comfortable, very different from years before. Daniel spoke first. I've wanted to tell you something. She waited. For a long time, I thought my biggest mistake was leaving you. He paused. But that wasn't it. She listened quietly. My biggest mistake was becoming someone capable of betraying the person who trusted me most. Evelyn looked at him. That's an important difference. I know. I've spent years trying to become someone that younger version of me wouldn't recognize. She smiled gently. How's that going? He laughed, slowly. But honestly, he reached into his pocket. Not with an envelope. Not with money. Just a folded piece of paper. What is it? My resignation letter. She looked confused. I've been serving on the board of a local business association. They offered me the presidency. That's wonderful. I turned it down. Why? Because someone else deserved it more. She frowned. I finally learned that life isn't about taking every opportunity. It's about deserving the ones you accept. Evelyn nodded. You've changed. I've tried. Daniel looked out over the city skyline. Do you remember what you told me the day I came to your house? Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. I think about that sentence almost every day. He smiled sadly. I lost the best marriage I could have ever had. I'll live with that forever, Evelyn answered softly. Yes, but living with regret isn't the same as living without purpose. He looked at her. You really believe that? I do. Then maybe there's hope for me. There always was. They stood in silence for another minute. Finally, Daniel extended his hand. Thank you for not letting my worst decision become your whole story. Evelyn shook his hand. And thank you. He looked surprised. For proving people can change. As Daniel walked away, Michael joined Evelyn on the terrace. You okay? She smiled. Better than okay. No unfinished business? She looked toward the ballroom doors where Daniel had disappeared. No. I think we both finally closed that chapter. Michael slipped his arm around her. You ready to go home? She nodded. Let's go. They walked toward the parking lot hand in hand. Neither of them noticed Melissa standing quietly near the lobby window. She had seen the handshake. She smiled to herself. Not because old love had returned. Because peace finally had. That evening, Evelyn placed one final item into the wooden memory box she'd kept for years. It wasn't a photograph. It wasn't a letter. It was a small note she wrote herself. You survived what you thought would destroy you. She closed the lid, locked the box, and carried it into the attic. She knew she would probably never open it again. Her past had taught her. It no longer owned her. Only one chapter remained. And it would reveal the greatest lesson of all. 5 years after the morning Daniel asked for a divorce, Evelyn stood once again at her front door. This time, she wasn't opening it to heartbreak. She was welcoming people who had come to celebrate. The backyard was filled with laughter. Former students? Neighbors. Teachers from across the country. Mrs. Henderson, now in her 80s, sat comfortably beneath a large maple tree, smiling proudly. Children ran across the grass chasing Charlie, whose gray muzzle revealed he was getting older, but whose spirit remained young. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now overflowed with joy. The celebration marked 2 milestones: the 5th anniversary of Evelyn's nonprofit writing foundation, and the opening of a new scholarship for students who dreamed of becoming writers but couldn't afford college. The scholarship carried a simple name: the New Beginning Scholarship. When reporters asked why she chose that name, Evelyn smiled. Because everyone deserves another chapter. As the afternoon continued, Michael tapped his glass gently. I'd like everyone's attention for just a moment. The conversations faded. He looked toward Evelyn. Most of you know her as an author. Some know her as a teacher. I know her as the woman who taught me that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about refusing to stay broken. The crowd applauded. Evelyn wiped away happy tears. Among the guests stood 2 unexpected faces: Daniel and Melissa. They had been invited. Not because they were family. Not because the past had been forgotten. But because forgiveness had made room for peace. They stayed near the back, quietly applauding with everyone else. Neither expected special attention. Neither wanted it. They were simply grateful to witness the life Evelyn had built. Later that afternoon, a teenage scholarship recipient approached Evelyn. She looked nervous. My parents divorced last year. Evelyn listened quietly. I don't think our family will ever be happy again. Evelyn smiled gently. Can I tell you a secret? The girl nodded. When something breaks, we naturally want our old life back. She paused. But sometimes, the life waiting for us is even better than the one we lost. The girl's eyes filled with hope. I needed to hear that. Evelyn hugged her. So did I once. Across the yard, Daniel watched the conversation. Melissa joined him. She really changed a lot of lives. Daniel smiled. She always did. I was just too selfish to notice. Melissa nodded. So was I. After a moment, she asked, Do you think she'll ever completely forget what we did? Daniel looked toward Evelyn, laughing with a group of children. No, I don't think we're supposed to forget our biggest mistakes. We're supposed to become better because of them. As the sun began to set, guests gathered for one final speech. Evelyn stepped onto the small wooden stage. The applause slowly faded. She looked around the crowd. At old friends, New friends, students, neighbors, people who had stood beside her in different seasons of life. Then she began. There was a time when I believed betrayal had ended my story. It felt like everything I loved had been taken away. I asked myself the same question over and over. Why me? She smiled softly. It took years to realize I had been asking the wrong question. The better question was, who will I become because of this? The audience remained completely silent. She continued, if someone betrays you, don't spend your life trying to make them suffer. Spend your life becoming someone who no longer needs their apology. Success isn't revenge. Peace is. Many people wiped away tears, including Daniel, including Melissa. After the event ended, Daniel and Melissa quietly prepared to leave. Before they reached their car, Evelyn called out, Daniel. He turned. She walked over with Michael beside her. Without hesitation, she held out her hand. Take care of yourself. Daniel shook it. I will. Melissa stepped forward. I'm sorry. Evelyn smiled gently. I know. That was enough. No dramatic speeches. No lingering resentment. Just acceptance. They parted with quiet respect. Years passed. Charlie's muzzle turned completely white before he peacefully passed away. Surrounded by the people who loved him, Evelyn and Michael eventually adopted another golden retriever from a rescue shelter. They named him Chance, because everyone deserved one. The scholarship continued helping students every year. Books written by Evelyn inspired millions. Michael expanded his nonprofit across the country. Daniel became the director of a workforce training program, helping unemployed adults rebuild their careers. Melissa eventually became the executive director of the women's shelter where she had once volunteered. Each of them carried scars from the past, but none allowed those scars to define their future. One quiet evening, many years later, Evelyn sat alone on her porch with a cup of tea. The maple tree Daniel had planted decades earlier towered over the yard. Its branches were stronger than ever. She smiled at the irony. Even something planted during a painful chapter could continue growing into something beautiful. Michael joined her. What are you thinking about? She looked at the tree. Life. He smiled. And? She reached for his hand. I used to think losing everything was the worst thing that could happen. She looked toward the glowing windows of the home they had built together. I know now. Sometimes losing the wrong people is how we finally make room for the right life. Michael kissed her forehead. The porch light glowed warmly. Inside, Chance barked happily. The house was filled with laughter, not because life had been perfect, but because hope had quietly outlasted heartbreak. And somewhere beyond the setting sun, the past finally released its hold. The end. Thank you for reading this journey with us. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like this video, comment and tell us your favorite moment from the story. Share this story with someone who could use a little hope this Christmas. Subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming, emotional stories that celebrate faith, family, love, and second chances.